Live. Welcome everyone, and thank you so much for joining us this afternoon for our Waracle webinar series. My name is Blair Walker, and I'll be your host for this afternoon, and I work for Waracle as part of the Research and Insights function within the commercial team. For those of you who aren't aware of Waracle or maybe have just got introduced to us, we are a software development partner that aims to make customers and patients' lives better with mobile technologies. And we work predominantly in the highly regulated environments of financial services and digital health. And we're proficient in all things mobile, web, emerging tech, and cloud. And today I am delighted to say that we have a guest with us, Raman Sethi, who is going to discuss the driving forces of technological change and digital development in the financial services sector. Just before I let Ram introduce himself, Ram joins us today to put forward his own views based on his wealth of experience, and his opinions that are shared during this webinar are not that of his current employer, Barclays International. But with all the formalities over with, I'll pass over to Ram to introduce himself.
Thank you very much, Blair, and thank you for inviting me today. It's a pleasure to be here. Just as a brief intro, as Blair has said, I head up digital channels and innovation for Barclays Private Bank. I've spent about 8 years within Barclays Group in the corporate side and in the retail side, working on things like mobile payments and innovation. Prior to that, I've worked at places like Sony Europe, Cisco, EE, and Orange. And way back in the day, used to design hi-fi loudspeakers and microphones. So quite a broad, diverse set of experience. And as Blair has said, I think what I'd like to do is bring all of that to bear in the way that I attempt to answer some of these questions, rather than just focusing on my experience with Barclays. So again, thank you very much for having me.
No problem at all. It's an absolute delight. Thank you so much. So just to do a little bit of housekeeping, the format of today's conversation will be that Ram and I will be discussing some questions in a sort of straight Q&A format. But during the discussion, as you engage with the kind of topics that we're speaking about, we encourage you to use the Q&A function within Zoom to add questions you would like me to ask Ram during the last 15 minutes. So we'll split the hour, probably about 40 minutes, discussing the questions that we have prepared, and then we'll have the last 15 minutes for attendee questions. So yeah, with that, I'll ask you the first question if you're happy to go, Ram.
That's fine.
Wonderful. So I'd like to start off by asking a question about the beating heart of the financial services sector, the customer. In terms of the world of banking, from retail banking to private banking, it feels like digital technologies are moving away from in-person interactions. And do you think that the one-to-one banking relationship has now kind of had its day, or do you think that technology always augments a personal touch?
Yeah, great question, and I think the answer to that depends really on which kind of segment of banking you're involved in. So I think from a retail perspective, we all know that banking via your mobile app or online. Well, actually, I can't even remember the last time I used my online banking. So mobile banking is prevalent and is popular and has obvious benefits. So I think in that sense, as we look, say, forward over the next 5 or 10 years, I think digital and mobile in particular will, and other devices as well, right? If we think about what's happening with voice user interfaces and the rise of those, they have a part to play in this. So I think in the retail sense, mobile and digital will become the driving factor over the old, I'm going in to have a conversation with my bank manager kind of model. However, I think in the private banking or the wealth management space, I still think that there is very much a need for that high touch, personal relationship, personal service that effectively service very complex needs of quite complex clients. So I think in that kind of area, mobile and digital technologies will augment that relationship. And by that, I mean, will take care of most of the day-to-day banking and the kind of the vanilla transactions that make up the majority of people's lives. What that then leaves open is the relationship to be based on adding more value and putting the client more at the center and being more proactive. But technology can augment that one-to-one relationship with Zoom, for example. I know that rose something like 700% in the first three months of the pandemic in terms of user growth. Technologies can augment that one-to-one relationship, but can also be used to drive better conversations between a private banker and a client. So I think broadly, where clients need some help, whether that's on the retail side or the private banking side, where they have a complex problem that they need to solve, I think there'll always be a need for a relationship, a one-to-one person relationship to help them through that. Finance is complex, right? And it's not top of everyone's mind. And when it is, a lot of people don't exactly know how to engage or what the best product is for them or what are the implications or the downside. So I think that reassurance that comes with a human interface, that's not the right phrase, but the reassurance that comes with a human sitting opposite a client, really understanding their needs, building that relationship is important. And I think in my mind, and it's interesting what you said, Blair, around the work that Waracle does, I kind of liken it a bit to personal trainers, right? I think in my own mind, fitness has similar parallels to money, right? Both are on people's minds a lot. Both are difficult to kind of execute on. Both require a lot of discipline, but both also have quite a large amount of technical knowledge behind them, right? So you could spend many hours being inefficient and not getting the results that you need in either weight loss or growing your assets. So I kind of license it, kind of compare it really to a personal trainer approach, that I'm able to go out and do my daily exercise, my transactional stuff, my going for a run or going for a walk every day. But actually, if there's something that I particularly want to work on, if I need that extra impetus, then a personal trainer stroke a personal advisor, if we're talking about finance, has its role to play on a monthly basis or a quarterly basis. My team, if they're on, will point out that I haven't seen a personal trainer in years, and they'd be right. But I still am able to I think about that comparison between how the fitness industry has evolved digitally and kind of liken that to banking or financial services.
That's fascinating, and I think it's interesting that you bring up the difference in the consumer profile and segmentation and space within the sector. Do you think that the as high net worth or ultra high net worth individuals potentially become younger demographics or sort of younger segmentations of demographics, so whether it's millennials or Gen Zs, do you think that almost shifts the conversation, or do you think that they'll kind of grow into almost the personas of their family offices and their mothers and fathers?
My own belief is that expectations will be set by the digital nativeness of that younger generation. So they will just expect, a digital service that is tailored to them, that is personalized, that has that immediate gratification, that as we move on in time, that potentially uses aspects like the behavioral analytics that comes with having a device on you all of the time. So I think they will continue to be, I mean, they are today, will continue to be very immersed in the digital realm and the digital way of doing things. But I still think that there will be a need for them to reach out to someone with experience that can offer that sense of reassurance, tone, expertise that you might not want to trust a bot with or AI with when things are particularly sensitive. So yeah, I think expectations will definitely shift. I don't think a 20-year-old or a 30-year-old or even a 40-year-old budding entrepreneur will in 20 years time be non-digital with their wealth. I don't believe that. They will still be digital, but I think there'll still be a place for a personal relationship in there.
And you mentioned sort of dominant form factors and customer expectations. And do you think that not just people's experience of, say, Cash App, Apple Pay, Revolut, but also, I suppose, the Ubers and the social media apps of the world, does that mobile first experience, is that the driving factor of what people expect from banks in terms of feature set, functionality, integrations, and the like?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I think financial services have taken a view on digital as really being one of let's digitize our existing processes, let's digitize our existing customer journeys, and let's optimize them in that process. And that's well and good, right? That's an obvious place to start when you move from an analog realm or a physical realm to a digital realm. But I think what's become apparent as technology has improved, as form factors have changed, as mobile bandwidths have increased, the prevalence of things like app stores, biometrics. I think what financial services should be thinking more about is, rather than just digitizing an existing customer journey around onboarding for a new product, actually, how do you use the unique capabilities now of a mobile device to build a better digital experience that wraps around that core product journey? So it's not being product centric in the way that you digitize processes. It's actually being customer centric, and probably a bit device centric as well, because the mobile involves a lot of unique characteristics. I mean, you think about connected apps, you think about geolocation, you think about some of the data privacy plays that Apple has made recently. You think about the fact that it's always with you, that it's always on. Cisco 15 years ago had the mantra of being able to do anything at any time, any place, right? Well, why should that be different today? And why is it taking so long to get to that model where actually the mobile device is seen as a differentiator in its own right in terms of its capabilities, not just a means of taking an existing process and making it digital? So all of the apps that you've mentioned, the Cash App and previously, Ping It in Barclays, being able to easily pay someone with a mobile number very simply, the convenience of Apple Pay and Android Pay is apparent to all and has really come into its own, during the pandemic. If you look at, say, the onboarding innovations that Revolut and Starling have made digitally, all of those set expectations going forward that actually kind of anything is possible. Now, the question then becomes, should it be, just because it is possible, should it be done? And is that in the right interests of the customer? And that's a whole different kind of argument. And the selling of personal data, if you look at Android in particular, or the harvesting, I should say, and use of personal data, it is interesting. Just because you can do it doesn't mean you should, right? And there's a whole argument around that. But fundamentally, I think all of the services that you've mentioned and some others are changing expectations around what is possible, but also should be changing expectations around a different experience for the customer, not just, I fill the same form out that I did 5 years ago for my mortgage application, I'm just doing it on a digital PDF. That doesn't cut it for me. It needs to go beyond that and needs to start to use some of the unique capabilities of the device.
That's fascinating, and I also think it probably has answered the next question, which I was going to ask, which was that in technological advancement, sometimes people just close the perceived competitive edge, and everyone starts to essentially optimize to the same feature, the same functionality, the same modern look and feel, and actually instead of looking outside the box. And just anecdotally, I remember a number of years ago now being taken through a voice application journey for an American bank by Microsoft, where it was actually from start to finish an insurance sign-up process that was 100% conversational tech. And everything from you could say your number plate, you could upload a picture, and the machine learning algorithm could pick out the identity of your car, and it feels like sometimes when we're thinking about, Revolut, Monzo, Starling Bank, these, kind of modern digital first banks, is that we all feel like we should be rushing towards that rather than thinking about what are the possibilities of not only the devices that we carry around every day, but also the other devices that we have in our homes.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that is going to be different at different places, and it's linked back to innovation and the way companies think about innovation. It's linked back to mindset and culture. Like you, I remember very clearly when I worked at a previous employer outside of financial services, and I was discussing quite a broad concept with this senior executive. And the response that came back to me, I was super excited, as I get when I'd like to discuss new things and, you know, potentially groundbreaking billion-dollar ideas. I get that little thing in my stomach. It's either you know, fear or it's excitement. I don't know which, probably a mix of two. But I remember articulating this idea, and this senior exec just looked at me and said, but we only ever want to be a centimeter ahead of our competition. We don't ever want to be a mile ahead, because that's expensive, right? And why do we need to be a mile ahead if we just maintain, you know, couple of inches ahead of them? And that really kind of shocked me, because this wasn't a guy that was closed-minded or boring or stuck in his ways. He was translating the economics of the business and the industry into a very succinct kind of phrase that said, look, that's why it's difficult. That's why it's difficult to take these grand ideas and move them forward. But then equally, you have other companies that embrace that. I mean, Google and their moonshots, right? Amazon and their, you know, if we're doing it for ourselves, let's do it for other people kind of mindset. There are companies and cultures out there that want to take those risks and want to think outside of the box. So I think the confirmation bias thing is yes, it's true in parts, but I do think as well that there are individuals and there are senior leaders that are actually interested in what the future looks like, and you're not going to build the future by incrementing on what you do today. You build the future by disrupting what you do today. And I think one of the most amazing things for me is around cannibalizing your own business model. There's very few companies in the world that would do that, and that's kind of necessary if you want to disrupt on a large scale. Disruption is around new business models, right? Disruption is the thing that pushes your share price up massively. Incremental changes do not, right? They might add a bit more in revenue, they might add a bit more in efficiency and margin, but they ain't going to change your share price massively. Disruptive change does that. And I think in order to do that, you've got to take a look at your business, and you've got to take a look at your sacred cows and say, right, is what we're planning going to be better than those? And I think today the big example that springs to mind is Apple, right? Apple have done that successfully by just completely taking out a category leader that was its main revenue and profit driver for a good number of years, right? iPod, where is it now? It doesn't exist. Why? Because they cannibalized that product and built it into the iPhone. And it's a hugely brave thing. It's not just about economics. It's not just about numbers. It's not just about, does this make sense from a business model perspective? It's having the bravery to actually go after it and believe in it, and understanding that if the iPhone failed, they were screwed, because they didn't have iPod to fall back on either. So there's it's much broader than confirmation bias. There's all sorts of multi-dimensions that go into coming up with the idea, creating a business case, understanding how you're going to deliver it, and then having the bravery and the guts to go after it as well, right? And convincing your shareholders too. Not easy.
Yeah, I bet. Absolutely. It's funny, it actually reminds me of a quote that I read yesterday, which I think went something to the effect of, if you want to explore the sea, you have to lose sight of the shore. And I think that is exactly what you're saying. It's like it takes a step into the unknown sometimes. Speaking about, I suppose, unknowns and how the financial services industry has changed maybe over the last 5 or 10 years. There was a friend of mine that once said on Twitter, fintech is just an elaborate bet that financial services companies don't want to hire their own software developers. Do you think that the idea of banks having to sort of move forward in a partnership model with fintechs helps them de-risk the innovation cycle? And do you think that there's a potential that banks miss out on developing or building their own IP in-house?
Yeah, so yes and no. I think in my experience, financial services organizations tend to want to build pretty much everything in-house, right? And personally, I'm a fan of partnership. I'm a fan of, if you've got an idea, go through do you build it, do you buy it, do you partner, or think of something more entrenched like a JV. Those are the options that be looked at, rather than this straightforward conclusion that, well, we'll build it. Well, do you have the right expertise? Do you have the right resource? Do you have the right vision? Do you have the right leadership? Is everyone aligned? So I think partnerships in fintech can help de-risk. I think banks, in particular, financial services in general, need to do a bit more thinking about how they do that. And it kind of comes back to some of the points that we were making previously, that the de-risking, you can play it a couple of ways, right? You can partner with a fintech to help de-risk an idea by effectively sharing the burden, right? And sharing the load, and de-risking it by having two sets of cultures and diversity and thought being brought to the table in a straight partnership. That comes with its own challenges as well. A lot of them I've just said, right? Having two different cultures can clash. Having a very regulatory culture versus a lighter regulatory culture can clash. Alignment of objectives. But if you can partner successfully, I agree that you can de-risk. But there is another way around de-risking and benefiting from that work, and that's the fast follower approach, right? So you look at the innovations that have happened in the market from fintechs. You can make a judgment whether that's successful or not. You can make a judgment whether there's value in that or not, or sustainability. But once it's taken hold or a foothold in the market, there is a strategy where the bigger players just come in and do something similar but improve upon it. I mean, Apple have been doing this for years. Apple as an innovator is not strictly true, not in the same way that perhaps a Sony was. But what Apple have done brilliantly is look at a market, look at the innovations that are out there, and then build and enhance those innovations to make it something much more scalable, much more customer-centric, much more intuitive, with a business model behind it. And I think that's the other potential way of de-risking from a company perspective, right? It works the other way as well, right? Smaller companies can look at what big companies have done to establish a marketplace and also fast follow, but do it in a differentiated way. So I think, in essence, financial services needs to do more from a cultural and a legal and operational way and a compliance way to partner more with other more nimble companies. But there are other ways to de-risk, looking at what's happening in the marketplace as well. I mean, just one example that springs to mind around partnering with fintechs. Standard kind of partnering agreements at any large company, you will place, for example, an unlimited liability on smaller companies in the event of a serious data breach, for example, because there's massive reputational harm that is done to the bigger of those enterprises from a brand perspective. But how many small companies would sign up to that? It's not equitable. It's not fair, from a partnering perspective. That's not partnering on equal terms. And so there are tiny details like that have such huge resonances for actually partnering successfully. And I say that's not just limited to financial services. That's a wider industry problem that need to be thought out, right? And they're there for good reason. Don't get me wrong. They're there to ultimately protect the business, which ultimately protects their customers. That's why they're there. It's for good reason. But if it stops you being innovative, if it stops you partnering, and if it stops you de-risking by working with other people, then something needs to be done about that.
Yeah, a lot of that resonated with me. I was in my last job in a retail bank. I was at a board meeting when people were discussing their subjective view on the possibilities of open banking, and it took a little while, but our chief customer officer said, this is just conjecture, and what we need is someone to make a move and see how well that lands in the space, and then we'll be a fast follower. And sometimes that is just the right strategy, quite frankly.
Yeah, it's worked well for a lot of companies, I think. So agreed. Yep.
So you mentioned on a couple of occasions in the last couple of questions about culture and about mindset and about the way that businesses approach partnerships. Do you think that digital transformation for financial services organizations, or maybe just in general for digital transformation, does it require an aspect of personal change in terms of mindset and ways of working for execs, C-suites, business leaders, in that they maybe have to be a little bit more open to that kind of test and learn kind of cycle?
Yeah, I think the short answer is yes for some. Some get it. Some have a bit of work to do around that, and you can understand why, right? Innovation is another word for change, really. When you strip it all down and you remove a lot of the I's and the N's and the O's, and change is difficult. It's difficult. Why? Because there is uncertainty there, and nobody wants to bet on uncertainty, right? Even innovators. I mean, they're more likely to bet on it. But if you don't have that mindset, it's why the hell am I doing this, right? And it's about risk, and it's about it's about bravery in some respects. So I think some C-suites are there and get it. Some think they get it and talk about it, but don't actually do it in practice. Some of them just rail against it, and that's not a bad thing, right? Not every firm can be or should be innovative, right? It's not a means. It's a means to an end. It's not a goal in your own right. Let's set up a company that's innovative. For what purpose? For innovation's sake? No. That innovation has to serve something, right? Ultimately, a customer or growth targets or efficiency or process or culture or whatever. So I think there's a lot of work still to be done, but some are there, some are not. And I think, as I said, the difficulties around it are about how do you invest in something that is uncertain, right? And also, I think what plays into that conversation is short-term thinking, which we all know. If you're listed, public, that's kind of what drives the share price. The share price is then what the senior execs look at and are often targeted against. But if you really want to approach innovation in a way that makes sense and is proper, and not compromised, I mean by that, not being compromised in the approach, then there has to be a mindset that allows ideas to flourish, right? It has to be, because you don't have innovation without ideas, right? If you don't allow ideas to flourish, they never grow. So you never end up with anything. So it becomes a self-defeating prophecy. So culture is important around that. The gardener of the idea suddenly becomes all important in that process, because an idea should, in most cases, will take many different paths before it hits its ultimate goal, right? A seed grows into a sprouting thing. I'm not a biologist. Grows into a sapling, grows into a young tree, grows into then this mighty oak that then produces its own seeds. But a seed looks very different to the mighty oak, right? It's gone through its own transformation. It's changed its essence of what it wants to be when it grows up. And it's the same with an idea. The first idea that people have is not what is going to be the $1 billion idea or the £1 billion idea. It has to go through several iterations. But if you take that seed and you put a heavy weight on it, let's call that heavyweight regulation or compliance or controls, then it's never going to grow.
Yeah.
Right? If it turns into a sapling and you start to hang off it operating models, commercial benefit, viability, it's going to get weighed down, right?
Yep.
It's not going to grow. I'm not saying you should forget those things, but they need to come in at the appropriate part when the idea is turned into a young tree or a sapling. Very little investment, bit of water, bit of food, love and attention, mindset. Then's the time to test it and stress test it with the controls and the commercial viability and the operating model. But I think too soon in companies, ideas by often people like me, actually, and other more senior people than me, we're kind of conditioned when someone comes to you with an idea to find the gaps in it.
Mm.
Actually, that's wrong. And what I've said in the innovation forum that I set at the private bank was we have 3 principles, right? Look for ideas to do something. Don't look for ideas not to do something at idea stage, right?
Yeah.
Don't load ideas down with heavy weights like compliance or regulation and controls. But I think thirdly, and probably the most important of the three, is be kind to those people that come with ideas, right? Because it's hard. It's hard to put yourself in front of a bunch of scary grey-haired execs and say, I've got this idea, and actually it's hugely disruptive, and you're going to look at me as if I'm mad. Why would anyone put themselves in that situation? The only way that they would is if they're supported in that idea at that stage, and they're treated with kindness and they're given the space to develop. So those are kind of three key principles for me right at the start of the innovation cycle that I think everyone could benefit from, right? There should be no innovation function in any company. There should not. It should be inherent with everyone. Everyone should be that gardener of ideas. But you only get that if you have the right culture, if you have the right garden, if you have the right soil. I'm stretching this analogy probably.
I like it. It's a great analogy.
But if you don't have that, then you'll never have the ideas. If you never have the ideas, you'll never have the change. If you never have the change, you become old and stale, and some other young upstart will come in and eat your lunch. So just short answer to your question, yeah, there needs to be some change at the C-suite level.
Well, it's fascinating. I remember reading an article about Amazon, and specifically it was a quote from Jeff Bezos that said, I would hate to think that any of my direct executives are celebrating in quarter success, because their focus should be in quarter 2 2023, so that, you know, to your exact point, moving the time horizon out of the in your P&L and moving it to some future state that you want to optimize to. It creates that growth journey, and you kind of need to build an environment which allows people to have mad ideas about where things could go, because, you know, would a book vendor have become, you know, the company that Amazon is today without that kind of culture in place from the get-go?
Yeah, absolutely. And the other thing that Bezos says as well is that there is no day two in the business. It's all day one, right? And I kind of like that as well, because to your point, it doesn't carve up your timeline. It's just one timeline, right, that you should be working to. It's not this is our day one and this is what we'll do day two. Day two, they'll often get swamped by other priorities or other complexities, and very rarely happens. So Bezos' solution, it's all day one, right? And I kind of like that because it brings that continuity into play. So yeah, good example.
100%. Another question that comes off the back of culture, and I suppose it's something that we have kind of as our kind of core purpose and way of working within Waracle. I have worked in financial services organizations where they've tried to implement Agile, and what they've ended up with is some kind of hybrid model where a single team works in Agile, and then it comes out into waterfall for the best part. Do you have experience, or do you think it is difficult or nigh impossible to truly adopt Agile in heavily regulated environments like finance? Or do you think, again, it's just, you need to build the right kind of sandpit, so to speak?
Look, nothing's impossible. Is it hard? Yes. But I would also argue that I don't think there is a pure Agile model. I don't think will work or translate into any company, right? I think Agile has to be adapted and modified, or pivoted, if you want to use that word, to adapt to the needs of the company and adapt to the specific needs of the culture and the workforce and the skill set and what needs to be achieved. So that's my own belief, right? Every company does Agile differently, and financial services shouldn't be any different. Shouldn't be any different to that. What I do think is easier is implementing things like an Agile mindset, Agile thinking, thinking about processes and process engineering in an Agile way, and design in an Agile way. I think those things can be done relatively quickly, because I think the principles of Agile resonate with people that are involved in those kind of tasks, right? I think Agile delivery is a lot harder in a heavily regulated environment for fairly obvious reasons, right? You've got massive program offices that do things a certain way, and they do things a certain way because they've got hugely complex jobs monitoring resource availability, allocation costs, strategic investment, milestones, return on investment, payback, escalation. It's a frightening job, and I have immense respect for anyone that kind of works in that area. For them to suddenly, for you to then say to them, yeah, but we're gonna be more customer centric. We're going to empower the team more. We're going to focus less on documentation, and most importantly, we're going to have the flexibility to change direction when we find that things don't work, or we've tested with customers and they don't like it. You can see how those worlds clash, right? If you don't have the mechanisms at a program level, or at a scrum master level, to be able to take that up into a larger organization, the clashes are really obvious. So I think if you could do as much of that agile kind of philosophy and thinking up to the point where you deliver in a formal way, I think that's more easily done than moving that into delivery. Not impossible. I think there's a lot of great work being done in financial institutions, and I will mention Barclays specifically. There's a lot of great work that's being done there, and has been done over quite a long number of years with different names to get to that more of an agile delivery. Still a lot more work to do, but it's hard. Make no mistake, it's hard, because you're clashing cultures and you're clashing worlds, and that comes back to what we were talking about before, Blair. It's change, and it's difficult, and it's uncertain. So who is going to be brave enough to do a Bezos and mandate, right, that there is no day two, or Bezos mandating that every piece of data that flows within Amazon must be delivered over an API, right? It takes someone with a lot of vision and a lot of bravery, and it's different for a founder, by the way, than it is for a CEO that's been in situ for 2 years. The dynamics are very, very different. It's a tough call to be able to say, right, we're shifting in this direction, and on a bet. Why is it a bet? Because they haven't done it before, right? They can look at other industries, but no two companies in the world are the same. So yeah, it's a tough nut to crack. And I would also say Agile probably doesn't work in all circumstances either when you want to deliver, right? You've got to be careful about what it is you're using Agile for and how you're using it, and taking the best bits out of it to deliver what you need to. It's not just a cookie cutter approach.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And I think, in my experience, you can take digital product teams and maybe customer experience teams, and you can take them to Spotify's offices, and you can, show them kind of the gold standard per se. But then it's very difficult if you don't then bring InfoSec or risk and compliance or a range of other sort of fundamentally important financial services departments within the bank along with you, because, they play not a role that just sort of orbits around the product and customer experience. They are at the center of those things, so it has to be a cross-organizational, cross-functional, cross-teams endeavor.
Yeah, I completely agree. And I think one of the things that annoys me, and again, you use Spotify as an example, but there are a million others, right? Facebook, when they launched and they grew, and everyone's like, oh, fail fast, move quickly. Always kind of rankled with me a little bit. It's like, no one's setting out to fail, but I get the test and learn concepts of that, but no one should have an ambition to fail. If you fail along the journey, great, get up, dust yourself off, learn from it, and move forward. I've always struggled with that mantra, but there's always been this tendency for large companies to look at those types of companies and say, all right, what is their delivery model or their operating model, and how do we replicate it? And it never works, because that model has grown up organically from day one in Facebook, or the tribes and chapters and guilds model in Spotify has grown up organically with those companies. That's the essence of how those companies get things done. You can't take someone else's essence and drop it into another company. It's nuts, isn't it? You wouldn't dream of doing that in any other scenario, but apparently, large corporations like to think that way. Well, we'll just adopt this chapter, guild, tribe model. Well, why is it going to work? We haven't grown up with it. We don't understand it. We haven't refined it over years. We haven't tweaked it. We haven't, you know, so there's a little bit of that I think execs need to be aware of.
Couldn't agree more. I was just having a little look through the question and answer. We're getting close to that point, and I noticed that someone asked a question that dovetails nicely with one of the questions that I was going to ask. So the anonymous attendee asked, what do you think the financial services landscape might look like in 2025, and how does the sector keep up with evolving expectations? And I was going to ask you if there was one thing that you could change before 2025 in the financial services sector, what might that be? So, how it might change over the next 3 to 5 years, and what would be the one thing you'd like to see?
So I think for me, it kind of comes back to the analogy about the personal trainer, but personalization is the thing for me. I think the financial services sector could do a lot more around how they personalize their services to their clients, especially through digital channels, right? The amount of data that banks hold on customers, right, is just vast. The amount of news and insight that is publicly available today that can generate insights and drive that personalized engagement through a digital channel, I think it is going to be immense. I think customers, as I said earlier, I think struggle with finances, right? I think it's always an anxiety point for the majority of people. Don't really know what to do, where to go. If I go, am I going to understand what's being talked about? So I think there is a real way to develop that personal relationship, not on a one-to-one model that we were talking about right at the start of this, but using digital AI content data combined in a lovely kind of wrapper that means that we engage people in a niche of one, right? This is the power of the internet. Fundamentally, we should be looking at people as a market of one, not as segments of thousands or tens of thousands or persona types, because we're beyond that now from a technology perspective. So for me, I think the big thing that I would like to see, and here's a personal view, is driving more of that unique insight and personalization to drive reassurance and activity and proactivity with customers, so they feel better about their financial health, right? In the same way that, what's the direct analogy, that my Apple Watch bloody shows me the damn rings every night that I haven't completed again, but at least that's a personal thing, right? This is how much you've done today, Ram, you lazy, this is how much you've done today. You need to do more. Now, whether it prompts me or motivates me, it does actually motivate me. But it's that kind of digital relationship around personalization that I think financial services should be doing a lot more about.
Yeah, it's funny you say that. I remember working on a project which was essentially a customer database that prompted a next best action. And I remember that the program was changed from being called personalization to contextualization, because the bank felt so uncomfortable with the idea that we were going to personalize things for individuals, because it felt like it sort of stepped over that guidance and into advice, and the implications that come with that in the regulatory environment. But I totally agree with you. I think there's lots of bespoke data points which can feel something that feels personal, but it's just contextualized. It's not farming or harvesting personally identifiable information. It's just saying, you've done these things and this is the next best step.
Yeah, absolutely. And it has to be positioned in the right way as well. And that's, we sometimes forget when we're navigating complex regulation or compliance or controls or legal, all of that, right? Well, let's call it a contextual data point. What the hell does that mean to the customer, right? Nothing. And this, at the end of the day, this is all for them, right? And it should be. And we should be transparent in the way that we transact and how we report and all of those things. But at the end of the day, if what we're doing is, doesn't breach data privacy, isn't creepy, is contextual, is timely, is relevant, serves a real need for the customer, and involves them in the testing, involves them in the design, involves them in the branding and the positioning, right? If you can do that, I think customers will start to look at utilities, and you could, bit of a stretch maybe, I need to do a bit more thinking about it, but you could probably evolve that model into things like electricity or water or other utilities where customers don't have a relationship or an affinity with or an engagement with. And I think that's true of finance as well, right? Yeah. So how do we build that? That's kind of the biggest challenge. That's kind of what it all boils down to. How do we use everything that we've been talking about today to make customers engage with a utility called financial services and actually warm to it and build a relationship with it and understand that it's important and it has a role to play in their lives?
Yeah, totally. There's two questions which, again, they're on a similar theme, so I'll kind of ask them together. The first one is about data solutions in relation to a personalized digital banking experience, and the second one is about how the industry goes about protecting customers from a data breach, identity fraud, cybersecurity point of view. And I'm sure that that's something that must come up a great deal in your role, your current role at Barclays International.
Yeah, so I think generally identity and verification and aspects like that, hugely important for obvious reasons, right? We first and foremost, we're there to protect our customers, right? And so hugely important. And I think sadly the solutions really come down to, the compromise is client experience. Sadly, that's it. And not all of that is down to banks. Some of that is down to regulation, right? So PSD2, in terms of the strong customer authentication around remote payments, that's not a great experience, right? Having to get an OTP over your phone and then put it into a field and do all of that, At exactly the same time where people are looking at ways of not having to enter card details into an online checkout. So on the one hand, a lot of great work being done by financial institutions to simplify that payment process. On the other hand, regulators coming in and making it more complex. So that is a key part, I think, for some innovative thinking. Goes back to the discussions that we had before. How can we really think about this differently? But sadly, I think that identity authentication verification bit will always be a priority over the customer experience, because the risk of it being wrong is just too great from a customer perspective. So, and also a lot of talk, as you will know, a couple of years ago about, frictionless payments and all the rest of it. Actually, there's a difference between frictionless and friction-free, right? Some processes need friction. Friction in some processes is a good thing, right? You can't, if you live in a world where everything is just, I want this and payments are done, I want that, payments are done, and you lose visibility and you lose track and there's no authentication, that's not a world I particularly want to live in. So again, just because you can do something doesn't mean that you should do something. And I think that ties into everything around keeping customers secure as well. Some friction is a good thing.
Yeah, I totally agree. And I think, from our perspective in terms of mobile app security or web platforms or the like, we just understand that it's a moving target, right? And it's an always on endeavor. And it's something that you need to just be stress testing and reviewing constantly, because you need to be at the forefront, because there's always going to be smart people who are involved in criminal activity. So you need to make sure that your best and your brightest are working on security at all times. I've got a question here, which is actually asked to me, which is kind of nice. So I'll briefly ask it and respond to it, and then you can put forward your view as well, Ram. So the question is, having worked on both sides, both in a bank and in a digital agency, how do you see the collaboration working between the companies? So I would say that there's probably a number of different ways in which it can work. We can help out with resource augmentation, where you have some of the right people in your organization and you need more of the right people to create the kind of cross-organizational teams and cross-discipline teams to drive forward projects or programs of work. And sometimes it is just that organizations potentially don't have the right frameworks and the right kind of methodologies, and so they want to outsource, large scale projects or programs of work to us as a digital agency. We work in a range of different ways, and I suppose on a range of different projects, like I say, across mobile, web, emerging tech, and so the software development piece can range and be very varied. But I suppose that our idea as an agency is that we want to be like on an equal footing, a strategic partner with any business that we work with, because we want the people that we put into an organization to be as involved and as sort of ingrained in the culture and the environment and the solutions as possible to get the best possible outcomes for our clients. I don't know if you have experience in your current role or in previous roles of working with agencies, and any view on how that collaboration works best, Ram.
Yeah, great pitch, by the way, Blair. I thought you potentially a role in PR and marketing awaits you, glittering role. Great pitch. I broadly agree with what you say. I think the biggest thing that I've learned, and it's a very simple thing, but the biggest thing that I've learned working with agencies over the years, and different agencies in different sectors, is it's all in the brief, right? It's all in the vision. It's all about inspiration, and it's all about empowerment, right? And by that I mean, let agencies go and do the things that they're good at, right? The customer can derail a massively beneficial relationship by being too prescriptive, in terms of what they want to see. And I was telling someone this story actually only a couple of days ago, but I have a particular example working with a design agency, and quite a well-known one, really, really high quality stuff. And we had a marketing director, not in my current employer, some years ago. We had a marketing director that went in and basically told, the designers and the copywriters what they wanted to see, like down to colors, right? Down to designs. This was in the kickoff meeting, right? This was in the kickoff meeting. What type of copy and tone, before any ideas had been generated, before any creative work had been done. And it just really left me with this mantra, which was, Jesus, let designers be designers, right? And I think that was a massive lesson for me, because you can come in and work with the best people in the world, but if you don't give them the time, the space for them to do their job and to demonstrate their expertise, you'll get nonsense, you'll get rubbish, right? So I'm a big believer of that, working with any partner, identify their strengths and let them use them, right? If they were my strengths, I wouldn't need them, right? So don't go in and dictate what you want or what your vision is, especially with creatives, So I'll rephrase that. Go in with the vision of what you want to achieve, but don't dictate how you get there. That's their strength.
We're going to cut out that little 30 seconds there, Ram. We're going to put front and center on our homepage. That was eloquently said. Beautifully done. Let's take another question. So there's a question here that says, hi, Ram, you spoke about risk and risk mitigation. What do you think gives companies the confidence to make big impact decisions like the one you mentioned with Apple and the iPod? So what do you think gives companies the ability to make those big decisions?
Well, if I had an absolute answer to that, I could make a lot of money, I think. It's a really good question. I think one of the obvious ways to go about it is that experimentation, right? You take a massive idea and you strip it down into component parts or MVPs or whatever you want to call it, depending on the methodology that you want to use. But chunk it up and experiment and constantly test and iterate and involve customers at every stage, because that then hopefully over time, if it's a huge disruptive idea that might take 4, 5, 6, 7 years to bring to market, by chunking up and taking a very kind of modular approach and a componentized approach can help you build confidence along the way, right? we've got an idea, we've tested it, we've refined it, we've tested it, we've refined it, we've tested it. Oh, actually, this plays out well. So test it with a bigger sample. You can do that now fairly easily online. So you can build up confidence that way and generate confidence up the line to senior stakeholders that actually we're onto something here, right? We've tested the product, we've tested the customer segment that is going to, we've tested the distribution, we've tested the creative, we've tested the pricing. We test the hell out of everything if you want. I'm not suggesting that you do that forever, but it can start to build the confidence up that actually this is on the right path. And then just have a view on, you could take an approach around seed funding, right? Around, all right, well, let's not put in the full 7 years worth of investment into that. Let's just put in a year or 2 years. But that has to be done with some kind of form of commitment. I don't necessarily agree that on those types of programs, you should be spoon-fed money every year. That just puts you in a stop-start mode, right? But there are ways to de-risk it, working with experts, looking at what other industries have done, maybe something similar and how that's played out in the market. All of these things come together to build confidence, I think, around big programs. But actually, a lot of big programs don't work like that either. Here's a vast amount of money. Here's a couple of hundred people to run it. Off you go. Mm-hmm. Well, that doesn't inspire you confidence either. So I'd much rather take the test and learn kind of experimentation route to build confidence.
I couldn't agree more, and I think my experience is similar in some respects. I remember having to pitch for an R&D budget, and it took, I think, about 6 months and maybe about 20 stakeholders across the organisation to take in this all singing, all dancing business case into board, and you realise that instead of asking for what you need, which is a couple of tens of thousands to get something off the ground, you then go in asking for 7.2 million and you inevitably get the thumbs down. And you're absolutely right, especially in relation to what you said earlier on about, checking that you have like a fertile area for something for an idea to grow, usually only takes a little bit of investment. And so break it down into sort of digestible chunks. I'm aware that we've got 2 minutes left of your very valuable time. And so I think we'll leave it there with questions, but thank you so much. There was about 15 in total, and I think you covered off some incredible themes. So thank you very much, 1, for attending, and 2, for putting forward your questions. The opportunity for me to speak with Ram today has been incredibly enjoyable. I also had a conversation last week and it was equally as enjoyable. And so fingers crossed we'll get to do this again, Ram. But it just leaves me to say thank you so much for giving up your time to do this. And hopefully we will get to do it again in the future.
Blair, look, thank you. And thank you to the rest of the team as well. Heather and Michelle and Angela in particular, and to you. I think it's been a real pleasure. I've really enjoyed meeting you last week and the hour today. And if any of those questions want to be directed to me on LinkedIn, for example, or via you, Blair, or whatever, I'm happy to take a crack at them if people are that interested. But my thanks to you for having me today. I've really enjoyed it. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thanks again for your time, and we'll let you get away to your 3 o'clock meeting. Thanks again, Ram.
Thank you very much. Take
Cheers.
care.
Bye now.